Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing? This is Jeremiah. We're having a webinar today on dynamic blocks. One of those things, obviously over the years, Autodesk improves AutoCAD and adds some cool new stuff, right? And this is a great example of one of those things that, in a lot of ways, what some people have used dynamic blocks for, Land Effects already does some other way. Color blocks being a great example, where we kind of feel the way we engineered those things works better. But there still is a great usage case for dynamic blocks. We're certainly not prejudiced against them. They really can be used for some cool stuff, and that's what this webinar is all about. We're going to show some really neat things you can do with them that really fit well within, even using Land Effects. So I just have a couple super quick housekeeping items for you before I get this handed over. First, there is a Q&A area, question and answer. Please note that little Q&A button at the bottom. And I would even recommend clicking it now. Get that box situated on your screen because you'll also be able to see any answers that we type out to any questions that other people ask. So it's just a really good companion to the webinar. And we are recording this, so you'll be able to watch this as early as about Monday morning. That should be all available on the website for you. So sit back and get ready. This is going to be a dynamic webinar. All right, Paul, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Jer. And welcome, everybody. As Jer said, my name is Paul Houchin, and today we are going to be talking a bit about dynamic blocks. But before we get started, I want to acknowledge our content creator, James Wooden, for doing the bulk of the research of the information that I'll be sharing today. And he is actually joining us and might be chiming in for helping out with questions and whatnot. So thank you, James, for doing all this. And also I want to give a shout out to the Land Effects user, Jeremy D. Litt in Israel, for inquiring about using these blocks a couple months back and getting us started on down this rabbit hole of researching all the capabilities of what dynamic blocks can achieve. And finally, I just want to mention that this is going to be really just an introduction into what a dynamic block is and some basic techniques for creating simpler items within these types of blocks. And perhaps later on we can produce some more content that dives even deeper into the capabilities of what we can achieve with these types of blocks. So today we're just going to brief the surface and introduce you to some of these capabilities. So here's the outline for the day. We're just going to talk about what a dynamic block is, why we want to use dynamic blocks, and then some techniques on creating dynamic blocks, going through some tools and definitions, and then we'll wrap it up by actually demonstrate making a dynamic block and showing off some of these techniques. So let's get into what a dynamic block is. First off, we should all know what a block is in AutoCAD. It's just a collection of geometries that act as a single object. So in this image, we have some line work on the left, various arcs, shapes, vertices and everything. And after that's blocked, it becomes a single item. And these are valuable because they're all grouped together in a single entity. And as such, they can be duplicated throughout a drawing without taxing your hardware too much, since every entry is actually referencing a single source. And that also means that if you make changes to that source, it's going to apply to all instances of that block, since they're all referencing that one source. And as you probably know, Land Effects uses blocks for the majority of its content, so your drawings are as streamlined as possible. But what is a dynamic block? A dynamic block is a block that has an additional set of rules that allow the block to take on extra properties, which can then be set after the block is placed. Changing these properties of the block will not affect other blocks of the same definition, as all the blocks have those extra rules applied to them as well. So as you can see in these images, we have kind of a basic set of French doors with these various grips here. These are what make it dynamic. Clicking on this grip allows you to have these various options for how open or closed the doors are. And you can choose these options and it'll actually transform the geometry of what is displayed for that block. So why do we use dynamic blocks? These blocks can be great assets in an array of different applications. So if we take this window, for example, we can apply a block and do on-the-fly design decisions with it because this block particular has various size options with it. And so if we wanted to create windows for this house elevation, we can transform the window to an appropriate size to fit within the house, or we can use the same block copied around and actually change the size of the window to different sizes. So these are all the same block reference, but they have different states that have been activated for this application. And here you can see all these different windows are still referencing a single block within your block dialog box. So how do we set up a dynamic block? The first thing you want to do before making a dynamic block is have a plan for what actions or behaviors you want your blocks to take on. Whether you want to apply rotating elements or stretching elements or various visibility states. You want to kind of have those as a plan before you get into it, because there's a lot of options and a lot of combinations and things that you can do with dynamic blocks, and you don't want to just start adding things to it if there's no purpose plan. So once you have your plan, you want to open up your block in the block editor. This is where all of the dynamic properties are applied. To open up your block editor, it's just the bedit command, or you can double click on a block that's in the drawing. And then once you have your block editor open, you'll have your block editor tools in the ribbon looking like this. And dynamic blocks contain what are called parameters and actions. Setting a parameter means that you are defining the grips and properties. Think of these as control points that the user will be clicking on and interacting with. Here we have in our block editor the various parameters that I've set to this block. They display in the block editor like dimensions or callouts. And then if you look at it in model space, we have these various grip points. Once you've established your parameters, you're going to set actions to the parameters. So if the parameter was a set of bicycle pedals, the action is then allowing or adding the allowance for the pedals to be spun or rotated. So it defines how the geometry of the dynamic block will move or change when the parameter is actually interacted with in model space. So as you can see here in the block editor, we have these little icons next to each of these parameters. Those are actions. So that in model space over here, you can actually click on the parameter grips and apply whatever that behavior is. And here we have a flip parameter and a flip action. Parameters and actions work together in various combinations, and some actions only apply to certain parameters. As you can see here, flip is only compatible with flip, whereas in this scenario, the linear parameter is compatible with the move, scale, stretch, and array action, and you can actually stack those up all onto a single parameter. So for today's demonstration, we're going to go over some of the simpler parameters and actions. First, we're going to do a point parameter with a move action. Then we'll do a rotate parameter with its corresponding rotate action. Then we'll do an alignment. We'll mess with some visibility states, add a flip parameter and a flip action, a polar parameter with a scale action, and then we'll finish up with the linear parameter with the array and stretch actions. And then we'll show saving that into the landifix library to be used. Some of the more advanced stuff that we're not going to get into today are the X and Y parameters, lookup parameters, base points, and then constraints. For various reasons, we're leaving that out, but the plan is to dive a little deeper into some of these that are allowed in FXCAD at a later point. So here we're just going to go through a few of these parameters to describe them and then show what actions they are compatible with. First off is the point parameter, which is just a single point that defines an X and Y location, and it's compatible with the move and stretch action. The linear parameter shows the distance between two anchor points. The grips are placed at each end, creating a line in between, and you can set that line to any angle. And then any action that you apply to that is going to only respond along that line. That's compatible with move, scale, stretch, and array. The polar parameter is similar in that it's linear, and it shows the 2 points with 2 grips on a line in between. But it's different in that the grips, when interacted with, can rotate, move, and stretch objects at that specified angle. Compatible with the move, scale, stretch, polar stretch, and array actions. The rotation parameter adds a rotation to an object or as many objects as you want within your block or even the whole block, and it's only compatible with the rotation action. The alignment parameter is one of the parameters that does not actually need an action attached to it. It defines a line that can then be used to align that block to an object within your drawing. And it always applies to the entire block. The flip parameter is similar to the mirror command, where you choose a reflection line or an axis and then some objects, and then you can flip those objects over that line when it's interacted with, and it's only compatible with the flip action. And then there's the visibility parameter, which allows you to set up multiple states of visibility. Similar to stacking layers, if only the selected layer was visible at any time. You can only set one visibility to a block at a time, but you can have as many states of visibilities within that as you want. And this is also one of those standalone parameters that requires no extra actions. So now that we've got a little bit of a taste on some of what these definitions are, we are going to actually go into demonstrating this. And Jared, is part of my screen cut off?
No, I mean,
Can you see my mouse right now?
I can see it. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's bigger than that window there. Like, see,
Okay,
I can see it over there. Yeah, you have blank area over there. Yeah.
You can see my mouse right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry. It's just the green indicator box is moved up.
Oh, yeah, that throws you. Okay. Nope,
Yeah.
you're good. I can see the full screen there.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so let's get into the demonstration here. So here we have a basketball court. This is currently just line work. It's pretty simple, but we want to add some parameters and actions to it to make it dynamic. So the first thing we want to do is have a plan. And my plan is just to demonstrate these items. So check on that. And what I need to do is make this a block for one and then open up in block editor. So I'm going to select this, and you can either do a write block or just a block command. You just need to save it as a block. And I'm going to give it a name, just call it b-ball court. I'm going to convert to block. And I think the base point is fine at 0, 0. So click OK. Now that I have a block, I can either use the bedit command and then choose that that option, or you can simply just double click on the block and it's going to open up the same dialog box. So now I want to open up my b-ball court in the block editor so I can start adding some parameters. If you don't have this box open, it's just this button here, the authoring palettes. So you want to have that open, and we want to start going through these. So the first thing I want to show is the point parameter with a move action. And to demonstrate that, I want to place a person or a player in this court and apply a move to him. So there's no players in it yet, but what I can do is actually just add one of our blocks from the FX Site tab in Plan Graphics within this block. So if I go to People, I can browse through my library here and choose a person that I want to add. How about this guy? Go OK. And I'm just going to place him right here. So I actually have a block that's going to be within this block now. A nested block is totally fine to be used within dynamic blocks. And if I want to set a parameter to him, all I got to do is click on that parameter. So the point. And just like everything else in CAD, you want to be following the chain of events that are laid out in the command line. So upon placing this parameter, it says that I need to specify the parameter location. So this is basically where my grip is going to be. And I just want to choose the lower left-hand corner. And now it's going to give me this little call out for that parameter. And it's going to give you sort of a basic name for that. Good practice when making dynamic blocks to make organization better and easier to read, especially once you start adding a lot of different control points to your block, is to name this. So it starts with position 1, but if I actually go to my properties box, which if this isn't open for you, it's command PR enter or prop or properties will open up this. And if you select that parameter, you have some options here. And under property labels, you can actually rename this. So I'm just going to name it player move so that I know that this is the grip point for moving the player. So notice here, I've set my parameter and there's this exclamation point. That is because there's no action applied to it yet. This is just a suggestion for a grip point, but there's nothing that it does yet. So now I need to apply my action. So I want to go into the Actions tab, and I'm going to use Move. And once I do that, we're going to follow the command line, and it says Select Parameter. So I'm going to click that parameter, and I'm going to select all the objects that I want to move when I interact with this parameter. And since this is a block already, I can just click that and then press Enter when complete. And I get this little icon here showing that there's a move action applied to this parameter. And so every time that you place a new parameter and action, you want to make sure that you test that, especially once you start combining and adding on more of these. You don't want to get too far and realize that a previous parameter was not set up correctly. So every time you set a parameter and an action, test it. And you can do that easily by simply going over to this test block button here, clicking on that, and it's going to open up your block to test with. So if I select my block, I now see that I have that grip point to move the player. I can click on it, and I can now move him wherever I want. And that's within the block. I'm not moving the entire block, I'm just moving a piece of it. So once we've tested it and it's good, close the test block and go back to the block editor. And now I want to add a rotation to the guy so that I can not only move him, but I can rotate him. To do that, I want to go to my parameters tab and click on the rotation button. And it tells me that I need to specify a base point. So that's going to be the point in which the object rotates. So I want to be right in the middle so that he rotates on kind of a pivot there. And then it's going to want me to specify the radius of the parameter. I'm just going to stretch it out to about here and give it an angle. And now a label location. So right there is fine. So my label's out, it's easy to read, and everything's telling me what I need to do. So I need to now apply the rotation action to this, which it's only compatible with rotate. So I need to choose rotate, click on the parameter, and once again, select that block and press enter. I've got an indicator that that worked. And before I test it, I kind of want to show some of the properties for the rotation parameter. So if I click on that, I can now go down in my properties and change some of these. So what's neat about rotation is setting the value sets. The angle type, you can leave it at none. And what that means is that when you rotate it, basically you can rotate a full 360 degrees, stopping at any point within the rotation. But if I want to have incremented rotations, I can set a value to this. Say I only want him to rotate 30 degrees at a time and then snap to each 30-degree increment. I can type 30 as the increment value. And then notice here I have these tick marks along the rotation. So now when I do rotate him, he's going to snap to each one of these. And the other type is the list, which is cool. You can then add values by clicking on this button here. And say I only want him to rotate 15 degrees, hit add. Maybe I want to rotate to 45 degrees and a 90 degrees. So you can set limits on which angles he snaps to as he rotates. Maybe I don't want the 355. Once I have all the angles that I want him to snap to, click OK. And again, you'll see indicators of which angles he's going to actually rotate to. So now that I've set up an action, I need to test. So I'm going to go to test block. And click on my block. And notice this is my new grip point for the rotation. And he's only going to rotate to those points that I've set for that. And if I move him, I can still move him. But notice that the rotation grip remains where it is, even if I move the guy over here. So now he's rotating on a completely different point. And why is that? That's because we set our move action first, and then we set our rotation, but the move didn't include the rotation action. So if we want to do that, we want to go back to our block editor, and we want to go to the move action here and right click on it. In these options, you can either choose a new selection set for what moves, or you can modify the existing set. Since the guy is already selected, I just want to modify and add in my rotation parameter. So I'm going to click on that and press enter when done. So that now if I go back to test the block and I move the player around, the rotation grip moves with it. Okay, pretty easy so far. Next thing I want to show is the alignment parameter. This is one of those standalone parameters that needs no action and is only applicable to the entire block. So what I want to do, the plan for this is to have the long side of the basketball court as an alignment reference, so that if I have an angled curb or gym or whatever I'm putting the basketball court into, I can then kind of snap it to that angle very easily. So to set that up, I just need to click the alignment parameter, specify the base point. I'm gonna turn snaps on with F3, and I'm gonna snap to the very corner of the court, and the alignment direction is just gonna be the other side of the court. So notice here I have that indicator for that parameter. Now I want to test it, make sure it's working. And so I'm just going to draw a polyline at a random angle over here and test the alignment. To do that, just click the grip and then drag it over to that line, and it should automatically align itself with that. And notice that it carried everything with that block over with it because that applies to the entire block. So now that I know that works, I can close the test block and move on. So now that we've covered a couple of the simpler items, and we'll go back to some more basic ones as well, but I want to show off visibility states, which in the research that I was looking at is considered one of the more advanced items when creating dynamic blocks. But if you've ever used any of the land effects dynamic blocks in the either elevation graphics or the plan graphics, you've been using blocks with visibility states. So I felt it was important to show this off here. So my plan for creating a visibility state is I want to not only have a full court basketball court, I want to also have a half court option. And that's going to be as a second option as a visibility state. So to achieve this, I first want to add my visibility grips or parameter. I'm just going to click on it. It's going to ask me to place the parameter location. And so this is where that grip point is going to be. And so I like to place them right at the upper right-hand corner. And once I've done that, you'll notice that the options for visibility up here have now been enabled. So I can start making visibility states. So the first thing you want to do is click on this button here, which is your visibility states manager. And it's going to kind of control all the different states in here. So the current state is visibility state 0. Right off the bat, I want to rename this to full court. So this is what I have already set on that visibility state. Now what I want to do is actually set a new visibility state, and I'm going to call it half court. And I want to choose the option to hide all existing objects in the new state. These other options allow you to actually bring objects from visibility 1 into visibility 2 so that they are visible in both states. But I want to have a completely new state for half court in this example. So I'm going to hide all existing objects in new state and click OK. So now I have a blank state. I can use this drop down to alternate between the two states. And then we'll go into these buttons in a little bit. So now what I want to do is copy all of these objects. I'm just going to select them all and press Control-C. And then I'm going to go to my half court. And I could paste it in and try to guess where it lies, but I want to see what lies on visibility, the first state, so that I can line them up perfectly when I paste these objects. To do that, click this button. This gives you a little grayed out display of all the various states that you have that aren't currently selected. So now that I have this here, I'm going to do a Control-V and paste it. And just so I get it perfectly on top, I'm going to place it over here and use the Move tool with the snap to snap it perfectly in line with this other state. Okay, once I've done that, I don't need my other state visible anymore. So I'm going to turn off this. And now I'm going to turn this into a half court. And I'm just going to do that by creating a trimming line to remove half the court. And I'm just going to extend this line, since it's the halfway point, to both sides of the parameter. Use the trim command and just get rid of these objects like that. And then I'm going to delete these. So now we have a half court. And if we go back to full court, we have these two states as intended. So now that we've done that, let's test the block to make sure that it works in model space. So what we do with visibility states is when we select it, select the block, we then have this, looks like a play or pause button, but pointed down. And you click on that, and we can now alternate between the two states. And if you notice, I didn't actually copy over those controls for this block from the full court. If I wanted to do that, I can do that in block editor. First off, I want to delete this guy because this is actually a copy of the block that I had before, and I'm actually going to be bringing in that initial block. So I'm going to delete him so we don't have a duplicate. And then I'm going to turn on my visibility mode so that I could see and interact with the objects that are on the first state. And I'm going to use this button. This makes things visible in the current state that you're in, so you can have this block and the actions applied to it in both state 1 and state 2. So if I click on this, I can then select my objects and press enter when done. And now he is visible in both states. So if I test this, I can move him around. And if I move to half court, he's still there and able to take on the actions that I applied to him. And then the last option here is if I didn't want him in my current state, I can use the make invisible and select those objects. Press enter. And now he's gone from half court, but remains in the full court. Okay, and moving on, let's go back to visibility number 2. With this, perhaps you want to apply a flip parameter. So say, instead of rotating this, I instead want to just be able to flip it over so that it the hoop and all the lines are on the left side instead of the right side. So I can do that with the flip parameter and action. So I'm going to click flip, and it's going to ask for a base point of the reflection line, which is kind of like that axis for the mirror. And I'm just going to make a line along the center here. And I'll put my flip controls right up here. Maybe I'll rename it something appropriate like court flip. And now I gotta add an action to that. To do so, go to actions, choose the flip. Once again, once you have your action, you want to select the parameter to apply it to, and then all of the objects that you want to flip. And in this case, I'm just going to do everything. Press enter when done, and test the block. So the flip wasn't placed on the full court, it was placed on the half court. So I need to go to that. And here's our flip indicator, or grip or control. Just click on that, and it's going to flip that over the axis that you defined. All right, moving right along. The final thing that I want to show with the half court is I want to do like an offset line or like a perimeter line that can stretch out beyond the court without actually scaling the court itself. Say it's a line to designate maybe this is an outside court and it's for the asphalt or whatever material the court's actually going to be on, and you want to be able to stretch out a rectangle that equally stretches out from the borders of this. So to do that, I will first want to actually draw the object that will be resized. And if you ever get concerned about the selection around this, just do a regen to get rid of that blue indicator line. But let's draw a rectangle around the court, and I'm just gonna eyeball it about this far from the outside of the court. Turn off my snaps. So I have this perimeter line that I want to expand or contract. What I need to do now is I want to set a polar parameter to this. That's this guy here. And we want to start off by choosing a base point. This is the point in which the objects will expand or contract to. And so I want to choose the middle of this object so that it expands out equally, both on the X and the Y coordinates. So this is the midpoint. And now I'm going to be drawing out my endpoint. And you can go to the side. I like to go to the corner on these. And then just like a dimension, you're going to drag this indicator out or label out. So now we have a grip point. We can call this offset boundary. I think that works. And we need to apply an action to it. So the action that I want to apply to this is the scale action. So I'll click on that, select the parameter, and then select the objects that I want to scale. And since I want the court, the initial court, to stay the same, I'm only just going to select that boundary line, that new rectangle that I drew. Once I'm done selecting, I'm going to press enter. And now I just need to test it. So let's go into my second visibility state, or the half court. And notice I have my grip points here. I can click on this, and now I'm moving out this boundary line. And because my initial base point is right in the middle, it is going to be pulling out equally from all sides. Okay, so that is all I want to show with the basketball court. I'm going to pull up in one more block instance to show off just a couple more items, and then we'll go into saving it into the library. Don't need to do that. 1 second here while I pull that up. So here is a simple geometry here that I made. It is a parking space. And these two lines are the painted lines for parking, and this is like a curb line. So just like before, I'm going to do a block command on it to turn it into a block. And actually, it's not setting on 0, 0, so I'm actually going to specify that on screen. I'm going to call it parking space. Click OK. And I want the insertion point to actually be right here so I can snap it to whatever I'm putting it on. And now we just want to open this in Block Editor as before and apply some parameters to it. So for this, I want to show off the linear parameter. and I want to show the array action and the stretch action. And the goal here is to be able to place this parking space in a plan and then along a linear line have it copy every 9 feet or the width of the parking space so that you can quickly put in your lines along a single line. And to do so, I need to first add a linear parameter. So we're going to specify our start point here. And for this, I'm just going to start on this corner. And I'm going to drag it out to the right. Once we've done that, we need to apply our array action, which is going to create copies of the lines as we stretch it out. So choose array, choose the parameter, and now I want to select the objects to have copied as I stretch out. And for that, it's just going to be these 3 lines. So once I have my selection, I'm going to press enter. And now the distance between the columns is what it's asking for. And I know that I want each space to be 9 feet wide. So I'm going to do 9 and the foot marker, press enter. And now I have my array action here. And we're going to go to test to make sure that this works. Select my block, give me some room. And now click the arrow grip and stretch it out. And voila, every 9 feet, there's a new marker. But my curb line here isn't coming with the array. So how do I do that? I want to add a stretch to this line so that it stretches along with my, my array. And to do so, I just need to use the stretch action. And because I already have a linear parameter here, I can just add this stretch action directly to that same parameter. So I chose stretch, click on the parameter, and for stretch, it wants you to pick which grip point or parameter point that you want to be interacting with to enact the stretch. And since I want it to stretch alongside with the array, I'm going to choose the same grip point as the array to the right here. And then the next step is to draw a window. And what this does is everything within that window is going to be stretched. So I'm just going to draw a window from here to here so that this line from this point to this point will stretch out as I move the parameter. Next, you need to select the objects that actually will stretch. And I just want to choose this line because that's all we're stretching. And I don't want to choose this because I don't want to stretch my, my painted line. So once you select your objects, press enter. Notice that you have a second icon for the action attached to this parameter. And now we just need to test. So if all went well, I should be able to grab this grip, move it outward, and as I move it outward, it's stretching that curb line and creating an array for the painted lines. So I'd say that was a success. So we can close the test block. And one thing I didn't go over yet is the parameters here. If you go into properties, you can choose the number of grips. Since this is pretty much only a left to right action here, I can actually just change the number of grips to 1 and take away this guy so that because there's no real reason from there. And so we're good on that. Once we have our block working the way it should, we can close the block editor, save changes to the block definition. So now we're in proper model space and it works fine. So now that we have a cool new block, we want to add it to the land effects library so that we can use it through our neat library system. To do that, it's just like saving any other block in LandFX. Go up to your FX site and the blocks drop down and choose the Save Block button. And it's going to ask for an insertion point. Since this is already a defined block in the drawing and it has an insertion point, I'm just going to press Enter and then simply select the block. And it's going to pull me into the block library location already. So I'm going to go into Plan Graphics. I already have a spot here for dynamic blocks. And here are some of my practice runs. Now I'm going to call this Real Parking Space. And save it. I can rename the definition in the drawing to match the new file name, but you don't have to. And since I want this to rotate on placement within the drawing, alternatively, I could have put an alignment on this so that it aligns with any curve that I'm putting it up against, but I'm just going to do a manual rotation and leave everything as is, so that we should be able to open up a drawing like this, go into our Plan Graphics library, go to where you saved your new block, and snap it to a corner. Make sure I've got this pretty much lined up. And I can now dynamically transform this block to include all of those spaces. So great for on the fly, figuring out how many spaces fit within an area. And with that, I think I can take some questions. I guess while we're preparing those questions, here's just some tips that we found or came up with when going through this. Like I was doing, name your parameters in the block editor, just so that when you start stacking up many parameters, it doesn't get too cluttered and it's easy to go back and re-edit that block at a later time. So give meaningful names and descriptions to those parameters. Every time you add a parameter in an action, use the test block button to make sure you get the desired effect. And finally, there are many ways to accomplish the same effect with dynamic blocks. It's going to be easier on you and everyone that works with the block to try and choose the simplest solution to achieving that action or that goal. And then avoid blocks that are super difficult to understand, use, and maintain.
Very cool. Definitely some good questions. If you might want to pop over to CAD, you could show, for instance, our dynamic people blocks, because we had a few people asking what dynamic blocks do we have in LandFX. But it might be kind of neat to show. Not only can you drop in one of that very first people block should be 100D, but if you copy that along a line, watch what happens. So this is something to note as you consider what to do with your own dynamic blocks that you might want to create, or of course suggest to us to round out. But built into the copy along a line, it will see that that is a dynamic block, and you can see that it's picking one of the different ones for each copy. So that works, of course, obviously great for people, things like boulders. So that's where we've started with adding dynamic blocks into LandFX by default, is people and boulders, things like that. I think we also did for vehicles. So that works really great to do the same thing, copy a row of vehicles, and then they're all different ones. So makes that a little easier to do. So, look for more of those. And then related, we had a really good question on, well, what if you wanted to associate a dynamic block with a reference note item? That's a very good question. That's not something that we have working yet, but we do want to have that. For instance, boulders is a great example to have the uh, you can click I'm sorry, which size boulder it is, and then have the reference note schedule tally up the individual quantities. So that would be very handy. Yeah, Paul's showing these fun ones, and is that the Scooby-Doo wagon,
It's the
Paul?
mystery machine. Yeah, I'm proud of that one.
I'm proud. There's my car. I'm proud of that one.
Oh yeah, there's your green Tesla. Uh,
So yeah. Any other comments on that, Paul?
yeah, so as I was showing, these people blocks, these car blocks, any of these blocks that you see in our graphics that start with 100D, at least in our current naming convention, those are dynamic blocks. And the way those are set up is how I set up that basketball court with the half court. They're visibility states. So when you select it, you have the visibility states grip here. And these are the different states, which are just simply different models altogether applied to that single block. And what that allows us to do, as you saw, is when I copied it along line, it does a sort of a random picking of each of those different states. And with people, maybe it doesn't randomly rotate them, but it does randomly choose those blocks. So you can quickly put in a crowd of people, say these are all people in a line, or you want to fill up your parking spaces with the cars. And with the quick queue commands while using copy along line, I was able to pretty quickly adjust how far space apart these cars are. So I can really, really quickly start putting in all this extra stuff in your plan using
Actually,
dynamic
the
blocks.
random rotation setting is if you hit a number key.
Ah, okay then. So there's a random rotation setting. And of course we are
And it's augmented random is what I like to call it. It picks a random one, but not the same. So it won't ever be the same
like
two
two
right
next to
next
each
to
other.
each other.
Right.
So it's smart random, I guess you might call it.
Smart random, augmented random. Yeah, but that's a land effects only thing. So it's pretty cool to have. And of course, our content team is putting together more and more blocks uh, constantly. So our library of dynamic blocks will be building up more and more. I know somewhat recently we did some elevation graphics with dynamic blocks, say like our doors. Each one of these doors is dynamic, so you have different size options for the different styles of doors. Same with the windows, various different window types that have various sizing options that you can just switch on the fly because they're dynamic. So as we continue to dive deeper into the capabilities of dynamic blocks, hopefully we're going to be producing some pretty killer stuff with that.
And also, please, I mean, let us know what will be important to you of those, because we're kind of, we either do a combination of guessing or picking what we kind of want to do or what we think would be cool, but also the squeaky wheel syndrome, right? But you would not believe, the content team loves that. We get a ticket that comes in, and someone's like, "Do you have some better boulder blocks or some whatever?" And yeah, we just route that over to them, and they will do that. I don't want to say I want to promise like same day service, of course, but no, they do jump right on it because it's, oh great, we can focus on that right now. So we really do want you to let us know some ones that you would prefer. And then Adam just chimed in with a very good question, which is regarding land effects details. And that's an interesting one. The tricky part with that is just simply that it would be I don't know, I just worry that it'd be a little challenging to edit, to have to, obviously to say, oh, I could just have this one detail of my, paver edging, but then I have these dynamic states of all the different versions of it, and I just worry that it would be a combination of being very difficult to edit, very challenging to maintain, be a very large file, and then the visibility state, it now has to be the detail title. But obviously, if still you're willing, if all that's still acceptable to you, we could certainly still support it. The other one we have to get around is we save details by W blocking them, and you can't W block a dynamic block. So there's some challenges with that, but obviously we certainly agree with you that it has this nice potential. So for now, though, we're keeping dynamic blocks just for the blocks themselves. Details, though, definitely that's something that we will look into more. And as an example, like if you have a previous one that you've been using, please send that in so we can get a sense on kind of how you did it. And if we're just kind of overthinking it, that's always a classic problem with any engineering, is don't over-engineer the complex, make it overcomplicated, right? But other than that, any parting thoughts, Paul?
Well, I suppose sort of like what we've been doing, just play around with it. It's fun to kind of see what capabilities there are with dynamic blocks, and there's not a whole lot of information that we were able to find online concerning these. So I think it's pretty open to what the capabilities are with these types of blocks. So the best thing to do to really get familiar with them is to really just start playing around with them and see what you can achieve. And if you come up with something cool, and you want to share it with us, we'll take a look at it. Be happy to do that. Um, and other than that, I think we're done here. If you don't already have the phone app, uh, you should get that. It has all of our newsletters, power tip videos, and information on events such as our ASLA party. So download that app for your phone, and otherwise have a wonderful weekend.